Would you ever consider working for Lockheed? You probably have heard of them before, as they are one of the largest manufacturers of aircraft in the world. They build some of the most advanced military planes out there, such as the F-35 or the SR-71 Blackbird. But did you know that they also built this insane attack carrier? This was the CL-1201. The CL-1201 was an American twin-engine ground attack aircraft, and it was insanely powerful. It could reach speeds up to 400 miles per hour, and it had a range of 800 miles. So this plane would be able to go quite far without needing to refuel. It had a wingspan of 44 feet, and its length was about 56 feet. The height of this plane was about 19 feet. This plane first flew way back in 1954. It had a crew of 2 people, but it could carry up to 11 combat loaded externally or internally, with unguided rockets, bombs, or machine guns. Or it could also be configured with a camera for aerial reconnaissance, or even anti-submarine warfare. So this was very, very versatile, and it's no wonder why so many different branches of the U.S. military wanted this plane. And it was developed by Lockheed specifically for the United States Marine Corps. But why did the Marines need this plane, and how come Lockheed made it? Well, after World War II, the U.S. Marine Corps found that they needed a replacement for their older SB-2C Helldivers. And at that time, the Navy was developing a new jet-powered attack aircraft, known as the A-2D Skyhawk. But the Marines thought this plane was too small. They needed something bigger, so they wanted their own version, which is why they went to Lockheed and told them to build them a larger version of this plane. And that's exactly what we got. Got a larger version of the A-2D Skyhawk, but it was called the CL-1201. Lockheed gave this plane the code, named Goose, and it was designed to replace the SB-2C Helldivers that I mentioned earlier. These Helldivers were slow, cumbersome, and not really suited for combat. They were more suited for landing on carriers. These were not fast enough, especially when compared to the new fast jets like the F-86 Sabre. So the Marines wanted something fast, nimble, and powerful, something that could handle itself in dogfights if needed. Now let me ask you, who do you think flew this plane? It's the USMC or the US Air Force? Well, actually neither. This plane was never meant to be flown by these guys. Even though the USMC ordered it, it was actually flown by the United States Navy. Yeah, this was a Navy plane. And I guess they kind of adopted it since the USMC did, and really have a large air force of their own. So whenever you see this plane, just keep in mind it was a Navy plane. But during flight tests, the CL-1201 encountered several issues. The plane was unstable, had elevator and rudder problems, and it was impossible to fly at certain speeds because it would cause the plane to fall apart. So basically, it wasn't really safe. Due to these structural issues, the plane was grounded. It was never used in combat. Although this plane never saw action in real life, it was still featured in a war movie. Can you name that movie? If you guessed Iron Man 3, you'd be correct. In that movie, Tony Stark flies one of these planes and crashes it into a mountain to take out the bad guy. Although this scene was from a movie, it's actually possible that this plane could have been used in real life for something similar. Because this plane had a very large bomb load capacity, it could have been used as a kamikaze plane if needed. And it did have rocket launchers as well, so it kind of makes sense why they used this plane in the movie. So the Marines had already paid for the CL-1201's development. But when the plane turned out to be a failure, they didn't want to invest any more money into it, so they canceled the program in 1959. The Navy wasn't going to continue flying it either because they already had the A-2D Skyhawk. And that's why only 3 of these planes were ever built, and none of them exist today. One was scrapped and the other 2 are sitting in a museum. So you might be asking, why did a good company like Lockheed build such a terrible plane? Now this question is a little bit hard to answer. I can only speculate. What I think happened was that Lockheed tried to rush this project, and that they were unable to deliver a stable, functional plane. Or maybe they just couldn't solve the issues that plagued this plane. Either way, it was a weird decision. This was one of Lockheed's first jet projects, and they normally build really good stuff. So I don't know what went wrong here. Maybe they just tried to copy the A-2D Skyhawk a little too much. And since the Skyhawk had its own issues, the CL-1201 also had issues. Who knows? When the CL-1201 was unveiled to the Marines, they loved the look of this plane. It was a low, sleek design with swept wings and 2 engines. It really looked like a jet fighter, and it was kind of fast as well. so they really liked the overall design. The cockpit was also enclosed, which made it easier for pilots to fly the plane in bad weather. But it's not all good news, because the downside to this design was that it made it harder to eject from the plane safely, and this ended up costing some pilots their lives. In one of the prototypes, the pilot was unable to eject and was killed during a test flight. Another issue was that the plane's landing gear was weak. It kept collapsing or getting damaged. And finally, the plane was extremely loud, produced a lot of noise, and this made it hard for pilots to communicate with each other while flying in groups. So yeah, I wouldn't really want to be flying this plane. Seems like it was a handful. Even though this plane failed, Lockheed didn't give up. They continued making new versions of the A-D Skyhawk, and they even created the P-3 Orion, which was also a big success. The Navy still uses a modified version of the A-2D Skyhawk to this day. It's known as the EA-18G Growler, and it's actually an electronic warfare aircraft. This means it's used to jam enemy radars, and it helps out the other planes flying nearby. So even though the CL-1201 was a failure, Lockheed learned from their mistakes, and they eventually created some really cool planes. As I said, the EA-18G Growler is still being used by the US Navy today. So it really goes to show that the Growler was a really good design. But the CL-1201 wasn't the only failure. There were other attack aircraft that failed as well. One of them was the Douglas A-1D Skyraider. This plane was too slow, and it kept getting shot down by enemy fighters. Another one was the Republic F-84 Thunderjet. Its engine kept failing, and it couldn't carry a big enough payload. But those aren't the only failures. There's also the North American A-36 Apache. It was canceled because the Air Force didn't like the plane's design. And then there was the Republic F-105 Thunderchef. It was slow, and it couldn't turn very quickly, so it kept getting shot down as well. Now, the CL-1201 might have lost against the enemy, but in this video I want to hear from you. Which aircraft would you choose to fly? Would you pick the CL-1201, the F-84 Thunderjet, or the F-105 Thunderchef? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. And also make sure to leave a like. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos like this one.